That's great. So I'm going to give a call to our friend Kevin Miller here, and hopefully Kevin's going to be able to join us on the call. Kevin is the filmmaker who has made a movie called Hellbound, and I want to give him a call and see if we can chat a little bit about his film. Kevin has interviewed a whole bunch of people in the scope of Christianity and asked them about their views of hell on a whole variety of things. Hey, Kevin, Doug Pagitt.
Hey, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, thanks. Hey, hope we have the time zone thing okay for you.
Yeah, no, I thought we were running a bit late, but or I thought I had the hours mixed up.
Oh, great. Well, so glad to have you on the show, and thanks for being on to talk about Hellbound. Yeah. I'm sure it's not the easiest thing to always tell people you want to talk about, where a guy's going to talk about hell and and all that. So tell us a little bit about why you started this project and this movie, and what you're up to with the movie overall.
Well, I started it. Actually, got the idea for it about 4 years ago because I was editing a book on hell for a friend of mine called "Her Gates Will Never Be Shut: Hope, Hell, and the New Jerusalem." And what the author did was really go back and re-examine all the terms in the Bible that are typically translated as hell, and all the different images of judgment. And then, going through a simple process of really defining those terms and looking at the different interpretive streams, you start to realize that rather than saying one and one thing only about hell, that the Bible is actually quite has numerous voices in tension speaking about this issue. And so what it really woke me up to is the fact that I think this conversation about hell and the post-mortem fate of people is suffering from really what I would call a one-wayism. And what I wanted to do with the film is really open the average Christian up to the variety of different perspectives on this issue, from the traditional fire and brimstone view to annihilation to universalism, because I think it's a really fascinating and fruitful discussion. Yeah,
and so I was able to watch the film last night, and what you have done is you've asked for people who hold different positions to tell you about why they hold that position, and you've edited together that into a larger narrative, into a larger story. So how many people did you interview in the movie? I wasn't really keeping count, but it felt like there were a lot.
Yeah, in the movie itself, there's probably about 24. I mean, we interviewed several more people, many of whom don't appear in the movie, just because it's part of the nature of making a documentary.
Right.
You cast a wide net, and as you become more and more focused on the crux of your story, certain lines of argument and certain individuals tend to fall away.
Yeah. So I guess that's probably why you didn't get up to Minneapolis, so we could have a conversation about. It's just too much. Just too many people talk about this. But what I did find interesting about it was that you asked people to reflect themselves on their view, and as you teased out in the movie and said here, kind of these three categories of eternal torment, annihilationism, and everyone goes to heaven in the universalism kind of perspective. Have you shown it to the people who were in the film, and were they all comfortable with the way that the film portrays their vantage point and their opinion?
Some of the people have seen the film, other people haven't. By and large, we've had a favorable response. Not everyone has been happy, perhaps, with the point of view of the film, but
sure.
I haven't had anyone come at me and say I've misrepresented them. And I think because all of these people are public figures, it'd be pretty foolish to try and misrepresent their point of view,
right,
because it would be easily contradicted by the public record. So I think that it really helps everyone if we can articulate everyone's positions as clearly as possible, so that people can actually make a true choice. And, I think the way this debate is often portrayed is that there's a group of people on one side who respect the Bible, respect Jesus, and cling to orthodoxy. And then there's those other folks who, raise alternate views. And they only do that because they don't respect the Bible. Jesus isn't central to them. They're just a bunch of liberals who are trying to make Christianity palatable to the masses.
Yeah,
so we definitely explore the relative merits of that accusation in the film, and so I think that we give the different positions a pretty fair shake.
Yeah, and I thought so too. I mean, I was, I heard things. I'm friends with many of the people in that film, so I know many of those people, and when I would see them come on, something would stir up in me, whether it's, Mark Driscoll out in Seattle, who we've been friends for a long time, and we disagree on nearly every topic of Christianity. But I do think you captured his point well. But I wanted to ask you, because there's times when Mark and other people that you interviewed in the film said things that were just patently inaccurate, right? Like they would say things about the history of Christianity, let's say, like,
yeah,
well, this is what people have thought through time. And I found myself yelling at my television screen last night, you know, and doing my thing about that. And my wife going, "Oh, just settle down. They can't actually hear you." And then later in the film, you would have other people who would express the other opinion about that idea. So Mark would say, well, all Christians held to this idea. And then later someone says, well, not all Christians have always held to that idea. Mm-hmm. When you were putting the film together, so I'm sort of thinking about the role that you played as an editor and as a filmmaker and a storyboarder in the film. Was it tempting to refute a statement that someone would make that seemed either illogical or just factually void? Did you feel like I should wait to respond to that, or did you have that tendency like I had of wanting to shout back and be like, no, that's actually not true, and here's somebody right now that's going to say something about that not being true? Like what made you comfortable waiting 20 minutes before? Because, you know, Mark would say things, and other people too, right? And I'm sure Mark would feel the same way about stuff that, you know, Greg Boyd said or something else. But that you would let that linger in someone's mind as if it was a true statement for 20 or 30 minutes before you responded to it. How did you decide when you were going to give the counter argument to a point that someone had made?
Well, you know, it's interesting. Your reaction was exactly the same as my composer's reaction the first time I showed him the film. He sat in my office and literally was yelling at the screen, saying, "That's not true. That's not true."
Right.
And you know, it's. I would say that there's really three acts to this film. Act one is what I call certainty, and what I want to do is really present the lock, stock, and barrel. Right. There is one and only one orthodox way of looking at this idea. It's been that way through history. It's that way across denominations. And if you question it, well, you're not really even a Christian. And so then Act two is really a re-examination of that position, which I would call ambiguity. And so Act three leads us to a position I would hope to call humility, where once we look at you know, the multiple voices, that perhaps no matter what our view is, that we realize we should hold it rather loosely. And so it is a little bit tense to let something like that hang for a while, but you know, you have to allow, if you're going to try and deconstruct an argument, you have to give people ample time to make their argument as clearly and concisely as possible. Yeah. And trust your audience to be smart enough to realize that what this person is saying is just can't be supported by the evidence. Yeah.
Well, I know that would be true of a radio audience, but of a film audience, would that also be true? You could trust those people? Are they trustworthy? Because the radio audience, I mean, they're very attuned, smart people. Yeah, the smartest you get. Sticking with that 1930s technology and all, you know. So this film is going to show in movie theaters, or is showing in movie theaters, and is coming to the Twin Cities on the 16th of September.
No, actually, the 21st.
The 21st of September. Yeah. So it's showing in theaters. How does a film like this end up in? Because it's not in every movie theater here. It's in select movie theaters. How does that happen? How does Hellbound end up in a movie theater? And if someone wanted it in their area, how would they get it there?
Well, we're doing what's called in the industry a platform release. So we're releasing in about, I think, 20 cities across the U.S. We're also releasing in about a dozen cities in Canada. And so we're beginning on September 21st in New York, Dallas, and Minneapolis. And then each week we're adding 3 to 5 cities after that.
Oh, so Minneapolis is one of the nation's release cities?
Yeah. Oh. Exactly, yeah. It's going to be one of the first places. We're also
As it should be.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. We're also doing a one-night event on September 12th as sort of a sneak preview in Nashville. So, okay. But yeah, how it worked out is that the person who financed the film, once we had the film in hand, we started to look at our distribution options and looking at the real, rapidly changing landscape of film distribution. We decided to go ahead and he agreed to finance distribution as well. So we brought on a company out of the U.S. and so it's allowed us to really pick and choose what cities we want to open in. We've also partnered with AMC theaters in a number of cities, and other smaller chains and independent theaters, and so that's kind of how it's working out.
And who is this financier? And can I have his phone number?
This is a mystery money man.
Is that possible?
I can give you his name. His name is Dave Crisco. He's a Canadian, and he's one of the three.
Never mind. Okay, moving on.
He's one of the three co-founders of Club Penguin, actually.
Oh, really?
Kids who have ever played with that, but yeah,
that's great. I was going to ask you at the end of the interview if you might be Canadian.
Oh yes, I might be.
Oh yeah, I can hear it in the O's. You know, we Minnesotans living on a border, living in one of the border states where we have to work hard to keep the border security up.
Oh yeah,
it's not just Arizona, that has their border issues. Sometimes we get those Canadians sneaking across for a little shopping at the Mall of America or something.
Oh yeah,
but they don't tend to stay in the United States the way that the friends from Mexico tend to stay for long term. Why is that? How come we don't see this big surge of Canadian immigrants?
Because they won't let us in.
Going in and taking we can sneak across the border right up there at Thief River Falls.
I actually live on the border, and let me tell you, I run on a road that goes along the border several times a week, and I've been doing that for 5 years, and pretty much every day I run, I see U.S. Border Patrol watching the border. I have yet to see a Canadian Border Patrol vehicle.
That is hilarious. That is hilarious. Way, right? For those Canadians, if they're sneaking in here, we're all really in trouble. So there's a third perspective, which there's a fourth perspective, which I was wondering if it would show up in the film, and I didn't see it. I'm wondering on your thoughts on this, because you're obviously someone who now has thought about the concept of hell, and we should talk a little bit, I think, about the facts of the movie and what you try to raise as the content of the movie itself, between the kind of standard eternal punishment suffering view, the annihilationist, which means that a person just no longer exists, and then the view of everyone goes to the place of God. Then there's this other view that people hold, which would be, look, there's no let's not talk about afterlife as location anyway. And in the film, I sense that the Orthodox priest was hearkening to this view, which is to say, maybe even universalism is too small of a notion, that we really could have a larger view of what life and God and the future and the past are really about. And there's a way to organize our thinking about time and space-time and a whole series of new conversation partners for the human experience and life and death and what comes. That's not that there's a location and either some people get to go there or all people get to go there, to remove the kind of get to go there metaphor from the conversation. And I sensed that was coming up a few times in the film. Had you thought about that, or do you not? Is that just all?
Yeah, no. To be honest, I think I probably would put myself in that position. It's odd that I would release a movie with a typology that I really have a hard time fitting myself into. Right. I mean, apart from more of a probably closer to an Orthodox view, because I think that the problem with whether you go with what I'll call infernalism, the traditional view, annihilationism or universalism, is that by and large these views tend to revolve around a matrix of punishment, crime and punishment. Yes, so it's about who gets punished, what can help us escape the punishment, what's the nature of the punishment, will the punishment end at some point, is it restored, but it's all about punishment. And I just feel that that's the wrong matrix to be looking at things through. And so, I would tend to agree with what you're talking about in terms of, I don't see this so much as destinations in the same way that life on Earth isn't about, are you going to end up in this destination or that one? You're basically in ever-changing psychological and emotional frames of mind.
Yeah.
And those are going to affect the way that you are, relating to God and other people. And I don't see any reason why, if there is a life after this one, that would really change. And that I think God's grand scheme for everything ultimately is reconciliation and unity. And so, so I mean, I could go on a long ways, but I think my perspective is quite different that way as well.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and I've wondered because I know in the film, film has to make decisions, and you can only have you have to decide what conversation you're going to have. And I do think it's worthwhile for people to have a conversation about the three kind of currently approved of Christian options for heaven and hell, right? Which you've sort of.
And let's not forget the 20 sub options under.
Yes, right. Yeah, yeah, and I guess they're more like three big categories or something, right? Of how one could think about this, because after a while, once someone starts thinking about it, they start to say to themselves, I don't know that it kind of makes sense, and so maybe we should not hold to it quite the way that we have. But it seems like there's a cosmology requirement to hold any one of those three positions, right? Like you have to sort of think about earth and human life being distinct from heaven and heavenly life, or hell and helly life, I guess. But you have to think about the world in those categories in order for any of the conversation to kind of make some sense. Mm-hmm. And I wonder what your opinion is on how do we endeavor in a different conversation, knowing the kinds of things that we know about the reality of the cosmos now, right? Where the earth isn't the center of the universe and heaven isn't up and hell isn't down. You know, I mean, those kinds of that kind of language. Do you think there's any hope for sort of a broader view of not only afterlife, but the implication on the rest of life? Or with all the work that you've done, you know, on editing books and writing blog posts, and now spending, you know, I imagine a few years of your life invested in this conversation about hell, do you think there's any hope for people to have a better conversation about these topics, or are we stuck?
I know, I definitely think so, and I think that conversation's already happening. And I think one of the purposes of Hellbound is to, you know, hopefully move people beyond this conversation, because what it comes down to, as Frank Schaeffer says in the film, is for a lot of people, it comes down to having correct belief, and that's the golden ticket, is correct belief. And I think that what we're trying to argue in the film is that actually, you know, it's more about how are we living, and what kind of people do our beliefs turn us into, and what kind of a world arises from those beliefs. And so, you know, in a subsequent film, I really would like to explore a radically different perspective on things, influenced quite strongly by the work of René Girard and mimetic theory, you know, really trying to bring him together actually with another thinker who's been really influential on me, named Ernest Becker, who died tragically young, but not before publishing The Denial of Death. And I think that I think that we can bring such a freeing perspective to things. But I think that what this film needs to do, it's a necessary first step to help break people free from the idea that if you question the traditional view, you can't even really call yourself a Christian anymore. I think that once we make it safe to have this conversation, then that conversation can lead to all sorts of interesting places. But I think we've got to start somewhere, and so what we want to do with the film is to make it as accessible as possible for people who haven't even maybe thought much about this issue at all.
Yeah. And
they might not even have known there were three positions, let alone something beyond those three positions. So let's start there. Let's encourage this conversation rather than shut it down, as some people want to do. And I have a lot of hope for where that can lead.
Well, what needs to happen for that subsequent film to happen? I mean, how deep is Mr. Crisco's pockets there?
Well, that's a discussion for Mr. Crisco.
Is he in? Should we call him right now? We could Skype him in. Get him on the record.
But definitely, I mean, of course, it's kind of a little bit of bad luck to be talking about a sequel when you haven't released your first yet.
I understand.
But I mean, whether it's going to be in a book or it's going to be in a film, these are some ideas I definitely want to explore.
I mean, you might not believe in hell, but you're still really superstitious when it comes to funding for a movie. I mean, let's not
my fingers are crossed right now.
Yeah, let's not be silly. Yeah, I totally, I totally get that. So I want to ask you a little bit more about the movie making process for you when you were having to decide how much of this you were going to include. Did you have in your mind ahead of time what the people you interviewed were going to say? and then selected those interviews because you knew the arc of that story? Because this is kind of one of those. I mean, this is a documentary style film, obviously, which is based off of a little bit of you, but mostly without even narration. It's really just the comments of the people that you're interviewing. Did you have your mind pretty well shaped as far as how this was going to go? And did anything surprise you in the making of the film that made you reorient what you were, what the final outcome was going to be?
Yeah, well, I've worked on a number of films, and what you typically begin with the documentary is a very detailed outline of your argument. And so what you're doing then is to say, well, I need, for instance, we're going to look at universalism. Who would be one of the best, most articulate voices, or who would be three people?
I see.
Or annihilationism. Who's done the most definitive work on this, or what have you? And so you start to map out the theological landscape and look at who are the leading lights of these different positions. And as far as a narrative thread, what's going to be the packaging for this? We chose the terrorist attacks on 9/11 because we felt that if we're going to have a discussion about hell and evil and justice, let's begin with an event that of evil that everyone can relate to. But how can we take that and use it as an image that we transform throughout the course of the film, so that people begin looking at it in one way, but they end the film looking at it quite differently.
Okay.
And so when it comes to people we interviewed, you're hoping that the person who wrote this fantastic book is going to be just as good at speaking as they are at writing. Now,
was that not true of anyone that you had in the?
Yes, that was unfortunately not true of a couple of people at least.
Who was that?
I'm not going to say
that.
I'm
just kidding you, Kevin. I'm just teasing.
You're doing lots of interviews on the radio. We experience that quite frequently. So
that's right.
Sure,
because I want to put them on my short list.
Well, and it's not as if they didn't have something useful to say.
Yeah,
it's just that they take 5 minutes to say it, and so that doesn't lend itself well to a film that you're always fighting against time. So and there were a lot of surprises along the way in terms of just how fantastic the people were. Like Frank Schaefer, we all looked at each other after we were done the interview with Frank Schaefer and said, well, I think we need to rename this film The Frank Schaefer Show.
It was a long interview, and he said all the good things, right?
He was just soundbite after soundbite.
Yeah.
Michael Hardin, too, was just fantastic. And the ability, I'm doing an interview right now, but I've done interviews and I stumble and bumble, and I just am amazed at some of these people, Brian McLaren as well, who could just deliver the goods, and it's a filmmaker's dream.
Yeah. And, did you have a whole reel of the bloopers and the the cutouts? Is there going to be at the end of the film in the theater version? Is there going to be the the cutouts that they do when people mess up their lines?
Unfortunately, no. I did get punched by Mike Bickle, and I wish I had that on film. But
really,
it was a friendly punch.
Oh, it was.
Well, he used to be a boxer when he was young. You know that.
I know. Yeah, but no, it was actually pretty interesting. After the interview, he came up to me and thumped me in the chest and thanked me for the conversation, and said that he hadn't really looked into these issues for a long time, and it really spurred him to want to get back into it. So,
wow,
that was kind of cool.
There was one part I wanted to ask you about. You were at this. I don't know what state it was in, but it was felt like it was Middle America or down south somewhere, where for a teenage youth group they were running one of these hell houses around. Maybe I'm guessing around Halloween or something, where kids come in and see the ramifications of life that has gone awry, and then the hell that's promised for people who act in such ways. And you asked one of the organizers, "Do you think Jesus would run a hell house?" And his response was, I mean, honest. He's like, "Oh man, I don't like. You're in way too deep. I don't know." Basically saying like, "I don't think so, but I don't know a good way to say that." To say that kind of answer. Did that happen for you in the course of conversations with people in this film, where people, because of your questions or having to articulate their response in a question answer format, that you saw some modulating or some shift in the way that they were thinking about these topics? Like, could you see that happening to people?
Yeah, definitely, and especially in conversations where things became a little bit more antagonistic, that you could see. I mean, it all depends how good you are at reading, I guess, body language. But definitely you could see people struggling with some of the counter arguments and that sort of thing. And that's only, to be expected. Yeah, and that fellow, he wasn't one of the organizers. He was a youth pastor who had led his youth group through the place.
Oh, I see.
It was interesting that the question was one that he probably had never really considered before.
Right.
And I think, to be fair to these folks, they're trying to be what, I think evangelicalism has a strength and a weakness, and the strength is the pragmatism that evangelicals will use anything and everything to share the gospel. The problem is what they end up doing is turning everything into a means to an end, and sometimes the methods, they'll be able to hold their nose and use a method to produce a result that, in other people's eyes looks a little bit ludicrous, and so that tends to undercut, I think, the work that they're trying to do.
How have audiences received this as you've been showing it around in the different sort of preview settings?
We've actually only showed it to one audience. We showed it at the Wild Goose Festival back in June. That was it, and it's been we got a really great response, and that was encouraging. It was also nerve-wracking because I had Frank Schaefer, Brian McLaren, and Michael Harden there, who had never seen the film. Yeah. So I mostly just watched the back of Frank Schaefer's head on.
Oh, really? And Frankie was okay with it?
He was okay. Yeah, he didn't punch me afterwards.
He didn't? So. Did he ask if you could re-edit it, give him a little more screen time? He did pretty well. He did pretty well in that movie.
I think he did okay.
Yeah, he had quite a bit. All right, so tell people how they could participate with you if this seems like an interesting conversation. The website is hellboundthemovie.com.
That's right.
And what could people do if they were wanting to be helpful?
Well, first thing is go check on the website. We have a theaters page and see if your city is listed there. And if it's not, we have a demand the movie function on the website where you can go and demand the movie in your city.
Oh, if they click that button, who receives that demand?
We will.
Oh, you will.
Yeah. Okay. So it goes to our team, and so right now Raleigh is leading the pack, and so we're looking at setting something up there. The other thing they can do is contact us directly through the site. We are doing regular theatrical, minimum 1 week runs in a number of cities, but we also want to do a lot of one-night events. We've already scheduled, one in Norfolk, one in Bellingham, Washington, and other places like that. And so if you think you can help us get, say, a minimum of 150 people together, we will endeavor to get a movie event happening in your city. And so you can contact us through the website as well if you want to try and set something like that up. And if the movie is opening in your city, you can do what Doug is doing, is help us raise awareness and spread the word about the film.
And it's Norfolk.
Norfolk,
What's
Virginia.
That? It's Norfolk,
Virginia. Oh. That's how they pronounce it.
Not Norfolk.
It's awkward. There's an L in there, but the L makes the O into a U.
Yeah,
it's unbelievable.
Really?
Yeah, it's a Southern accent. It's Norfolk, Virginia. No, and we're not just teasing you. So if you're on a radio interview there, that you end up, saying something funny.
Yeah, you don't need to be sorry about that.
No, it's true. It's that is how they pronounce it. Okay, so if it's here in the Twin Cities, you're gonna ask people from churches to go see it. Do you think the folks from Bethlehem Baptist Church are gonna put a flyer out in the lobby?
Well, we have extended the invitation.
Because that's what's interesting to me, right? Like you didn't. I don't think you interviewed John Piper. You just had cutouts of John. Is that right?
Well, yeah, and we went after John Piper and Tim Keller, but both of them suddenly had very busy schedules to the point they knew 6 months in advance they wouldn't have 15 minutes available in September. Oh. So yeah,
I think they didn't want to do the interview.
Yeah, I think that might have been what they were trying to say to us. But I want to mention, too, in Minneapolis right now, I am talking to Greg Boyd about doing a special Q&A screening with him and I on September 25th. So keep your eyes peeled on the website for that.
And you would do that, at their place or something? At their
no,
at
we'll do it at the AMC Theater, actually.
Okay, all right. And so do you think like guys like at Mars Hill Church or do you think Mark Driscoll's going to suggest that his people go see this film when it's in Seattle, or do you have the impression that guys like Mark think, even though he was his point of view was articulated, that the film is really has a point to be in argument with his position.
Yeah, I don't think Mark Driscoll's afraid of an argument, and I think that he, even though I take issue with his position, I'm hoping that he will be pleased with the amount of screen time he gets in the film and what he actually says in the film. So I'm hoping he's open-minded enough to encourage his people to engage with the film, even if only to help them understand why he disagrees with it. So yeah, I really am hoping that he will. It really comes down to Mark, and
Yeah.
you know him, and I only met him for a brief time, but I experienced him to be a guy who enjoys a good debate, a good discussion.
Yeah,
So I think that he'll find that in the film.
In fact, I wanted to ask you what there was a particular edit in the film that was interesting to me, and I wonder how you as a filmmaker dealt with it, or thought about it, or comfortable with it, or how you think about these things. I think it was a place where Brian or someone who was arguing for a retributive understanding of hell was saying people who hold to your kind of traditional Inferno genre understanding of hell, they're really dealing with some anger, and there's anger that's happening, and then there's a cutaway to Mark where he's I guess in a sermon or something, he's got a headset on, like a microphone, and he's kind of yelling at the crowd of people that are in the room. And so it sort of puts this juxtaposition of like, well, if a guy's got an anger issue, or like is all pissed off about something, then that's this is the kind of doctrine that they end up gravitating toward. Did you know what I'm getting at? And do you remember that part that I'm referring to, or do you?
Yeah. Oh no, I remember it.
Yeah. I'm sure you remember it, but you know what I'm referring to? Like, did you worry about that? Like, is that the kind of thing as a filmmaker you're like, hey, hang on, let's not do a cutaway to, like if the guy says, hey, when the super crazies think something, let's not do a cutaway to, the Westboro Baptist people or something, because we don't want to make it sound like we're saying that.
I think that in the end, we become like the God we believe in. And so I think that it's important to try and show not only the root but the fruit of a certain belief system. So if you believe, and this is a discussion I've been having online right now with Justin Taylor and David French, kind of going in dueling blog posts.
Oh boy!
In terms of God being violent, because we find ourselves in a difficult situation if we have a God who commands us to love our enemies and to forgive them 7 times, 70 times, and all that sort of thing, and yet who will ultimately violently dispatch with his enemies in hell.
Yeah.
It's not an apparent contradiction. It is a contradiction. Now, the way certain people will get around that is to say, well, God has one set of standards for himself as the creator of the universe, as he should, and another one for us. Right. That's a difficult position, because you're essentially saying that God has a double standard, and that we tend to call those people hypocrites. And so, but just to get around to the point of anger, is that I believe that if you have a government which solves its problems by violence primarily, you will have a violent citizenry. And because we take these moral examples and we emulate them. This is really why I want to look at René Girard in some subsequent works, because he really talks about this whole notion of mimesis, or imitation. And so, when it comes to religion, we become like the God we believe in. And so I don't think it's any surprise that if we believe in a God who's ultimately wrathful, that that God will attract people who have wrath in that way.
Yeah, I've wondered very similar things, and I've even wondered if perhaps sometimes it works the other direction as well, right? Like, well, if you can find, not only do we tend to emulate our understanding of the way God is, but we tend to gravitate toward a view of God that fits how we are, right? And those two things can create a symbiotic partnership that can really get us to a reinforcing understanding of God. And then, to me, that's what makes having someone with a different view such a crucial part of helping us have a vibrant life and faith and understanding of the world, is that if you that people who think differently than you do and conclude differently, they break the cycle of you being influenced by your own views and by you only gravitating toward views that feel right to you. That it sort of breaks that pattern. Did you? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, it breaks you out of the echo chamber.
Yeah.
You know, something Thomas Talbot says. Thomas Talbot is a philosopher of religion he's put forward, I think, a very strong case for universalism. And he says, he's quoting an old English prophet of his who says that we don't read the Bible as it is, we read the Bible as we are.
Yes, right.
And I think that's a really important observation to make. And the danger I think we fall into is going from believing that my view might be right to my view can't be wrong. And so we make a subtle shift from being a seeker of truth to merely a defender of an idea. And I think that's something we need to really be conscious of. So I think you're right. It is good to go head to head with ideas that disagree with you, as long as we're not just being dismissive in the sense that, well, there's no way, you know, Mark Driscoll, for instance, could be right, so all I'm going to do is show him why he's wrong.
Sure.
Can we actually really listen to the case that other people are making and consider it, you know, and you know, with a mind that's open enough that we might potentially revise our views in light of the new information.
So can I ask you one more question about a piece in there? There was a part where somebody who supported the Inferno view of hell uses the book of Daniel and Isaiah 66 passages and is very specific about those. And then 20 minutes later, somebody else comes back and says, well, there's this passage in Daniel and this passage in Isaiah 66, and they don't actually say blah, 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 blah. Was that a plant in some way? Like, did you ask the person to respond to those passages? Or did that person just have those passages in their mind, which supported their universalism view, as opposed to, and subsequently or previously, Mark had the view of the book of, you know, the same view of the book of Daniel and Isaiah 66?
I can't honestly recall the exact circumstances of the way the question was asked, but I wouldn't call it a plant for sure. But I would say that these two passages in the Old Testament really are the only passages that people tend to point to. And so I may have in the interview said, well, what do you think about these?
About those?
And then they would have responded.
Well, great. And do you find yourself better off for being endeavoring in this for having endeavored in this conversation, or are there times where you say to yourself, how have I spent the last year thinking so much about hell? Like how is this for you?
It's been fantastic. I mean, I'm having the best time of my life, and I think about hell all the time, and my life has never been better.
All right. So if you want to see the details of the film online, they're at hellboundthemovie.com. Kevin Miller, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Kevin's the creator and the director and the producer of this film. So Kevin, thanks for being on the show. And hey, folks, thanks a lot. We will be back with you again next week on Wednesdays from 10 to 11:30-ish, now that we have the freedom to have a radio show anytime, any place we want. Intern, thanks for good work today. And I'm going to be off at the Wild Goose Festival, and if anything of significance were to happen there, I will put up a quick radio show. But until then, Doug Pagitt Radio signing off from Minneapolis.